700 years ago, Britain was rich and powerful. Then, in 1348, all that changed in an instant, when the Black Death arrived from across the waves. This terrible plague had already swept across Europe, killing millions. Now it was about to rip into an unsuspecting Britain, with a destructive force more deadly than any invading army in history. Nothing would stop the Black Death as it swept through England's cities, towns, and villages. And across the country, bodies piled up as families and communities were ravaged by the disease. Over 3 million people, around half of the population, would die in the next 2 years. No one was safe. It attacked rich and poor indiscriminately. The country was crippled, gripped by fear. I'm Dan Snow, and in this programme I'll uncover this shocking story day by day, week by week. I'll discover exactly how the Black Death got here and how it managed to take hold, causing carnage as it spread from home to home, village to town, throughout the country. This is evidence of a catastrophe that is overwhelming this community. And I'll witness the cause of the disease up close.
So a little rat just ran over my foot, and we're now surrounded by rats in here. If this was during the plague, would this be a suicidally dangerous thing to do?
While archaeologist Raksha Dave will investigate the terrifying reality of the plague.
I'd be slightly concerned if I looked in the mirror and I saw that on the side of my neck.
And the gruesome ways doctors tried to cure the dying.
So, what I'm going to need you to do is roll up a sleeve.
Okay. You're not really going to do it though, are you?
This is the terrifying story of the Black Death. England. 700 years ago, the country stood on the brink of disaster. In June 1348, as people were going about their normal daily business, they were totally unaware that their lives were about to be shattered as a deadly threat headed towards the Dorset coast. According to a contemporary account, it was just before midsummer, which was traditionally a time to take a bit of a break, have some fun before a long, hard run into harvest. But this year, there'd be no merrymaking, because out here at sea there were ships approaching. Ships from Gascony in France, and on board, we're told by the chroniclers, the sailors were sickening with a new kind of disease known as pestilence. The ships are thought to have been carrying wine, and they were heading here to Melcombe Regis in Dorset. Today, it's a quiet, picturesque part of Weymouth with a harbour full of luxury yachts and pleasure cruisers. But in 1348, this was a busy working port teeming with fishing boats and merchant ships. To the unsuspecting people of Melcombe, the approaching vessels were just 2 more boats full of goods from Europe. Nothing out of the ordinary. Looking out at the harbour now with its pleasure boats and the pubs and tourist shops along the quaysides, it's hard to imagine that 700 years ago, this was ground zero, where the most devastating disease in our history entered the country. We don't know how many sailors were infected on board those ships, and we don't know if any had already died by the time they docked. What we do know is that no attempt was made to quarantine those ships, so the infected sailors and their cargoes came ashore. At first, there was no sign that anything was wrong. They offloaded their cargo on the quayside, paid their dues at the customs house, and drank in the taverns. But while they were mingling with the locals, without anyone knowing, the disease began to take hold.
To begin with, local people around here would have reported having flu-like symptoms or feeling a bit off colour, perhaps nothing too drastic. But that was about to change. Their conditions would rapidly get worse until they would become the first victims here in Britain of the Black Death.
At that point, none of them knew that they were suffering from the most devastating disease in history: bubonic plague. Raksha has come to the old operating theatre near London Bridge to meet Dr. Susie Edge and special effects makeup artist Ruth Pease to learn more about the horrific symptoms of bubonic plague.
We've got George here, who's our Black Death volunteer, and Ruth's going to be applying all the different symptoms that he goes through. But at the moment, he's just looking a bit rough, isn't he?
For a couple of days, he's going to be feeling flu-like symptoms. So maybe a little bit nauseated, maybe a sore tummy, maybe even being sick, maybe some diarrhea. And the lymph nodes will start to grow, and that's where we see the classic buboes. Once these appear in the neck or the groin or the armpits, that's when we know that he's suffering from bubonic plague.
For those first victims in Melcombe, the appearance of large, swollen lumps, known as buboes, would have been a terrifying sight like nothing they'd seen before.
And that's where the word bubonic comes from, is from these buboes. I mean, but what are they?
The lymph nodes, where they are in the neck or throughout the body, are collections of immune cells, and that's where the bacteria are taken to try and break them up. So these are collections of pus. It's going to become really painful. Have a feel, it's going to be really tight, and you might
That is pretty gross. What day are we on? Day 4 or 5?
Day 4 or 5, yes, yeah. And after that, after day 5, we might even see them getting so big and so tight that they might burst open and the pus could come out.
At this point, a few people might survive, but many would worsen rapidly, and by day 6 or 7, their skin would turn black.
The skin is dying and it's not getting any blood. It's shutting down. I think these are the signs now that George isn't going to make it through.
So all in all, the whole process would take about a week? That's really scary, isn't it? Very rapid.
I think it is quite rapid, and the family at that point must be looking, wondering if they were going to be next.
In Melcombe, on the 23rd of June 1348, just days after the ships from Gascony had docked, the first person died of this hideous new disease. Over the next 2 weeks, more and more of the town's residents would fall ill and die. They had no idea why the disease had come here and how it was being spread. But today, we think one reason might lie in the cargo of wine the ships were carrying.
Now, wine in those days was transported in big earthenware jugs, surrounded in straw to stop them breaking on the journey. Now, that straw proved perfect, not just for stopping breakages, but for making nests in. Nests by unwanted stowaways and plague super spreaders, rats.
At the time, no one linked rats to the arrival or spread of the plague. The connection was made 500 years later in 1894 when a Swiss-French doctor, Alexandre Yersin, identified that plague was caused by a deadly bacteria found in rats. And then later research showed that the rat's fleas spread the bacteria to humans. To find out more about the role rats played in bringing the plague to Britain and then spreading it, I'm meeting Dr. David Orton at Wildwood Animal Sanctuary, home to lots and lots of rats.
So rats have got a bad reputation, haven't they? But how important were they in the spread of the plague?
It seems likely that they probably played a pretty big role in it. So the black rat, the species that we're in with here, isn't actually from Europe originally. It's a species which we think came from South Asia, and it seems to have reached the Mediterranean by the Roman period. And then when the Romans expanded through Europe, they brought it with them. So wherever you had the kind of the trade networks and the urbanism that went with the Roman Empire, we had rats as well. Certainly by the 13th century, they're ubiquitous across almost all of Europe.
So rats are a sign of a thriving economy, busy international trade, lots of people coming and going. So the famous wine trade coming up from the south of France into England, that would have been a highway for rats.
I think it's a fair bet that if you're looking at a decent-sized ship in the 13th or 14th century, it's going to have rats on it. But if you have a ship that's carrying a cargo of something like grain, the rats will multiply. You'll have a large number of rats potentially by the time it gets to wherever it's going.
And the thing about ships, they're not only a nice place for rats to live, but they move around all the time, therefore allowing plague and, well, rats and the plague to spread.
There's always the possibility some of those rats are going to go ashore.
So a little rat just ran over my foot, and we're surrounded by rats in here. 700 years ago, in a time of plague, this would have been a suicidally dangerous thing to do.
Yeah, probably wouldn't be a great idea.
In 1347, the Black Death struck major trading ports in Europe with devastating force. In Venice, over 60,000 people died. Genoa, at least 30,000. And Marseille, 9,000. Now, in Britain, Melcombe's connection to international trade put it directly in the firing line.
It's hard to imagine just how traumatic it was for the people of Melcombe, for those who witnessed the spread of the disease, let alone those who contracted it. Just think, in the middle of June, things were fairly normal. And then within days of these ships arriving, horrifying symptoms spread through friends, neighbours, family, loved ones, many of whom would be dead within the week.
It's estimated that in total, about a third of Melcombe's population, over 400 people, died in a matter of months. The disease did begin to creep out of town, and in July, 4 deaths were reported 3 miles from Melcombe, in the village of Chickerell. But for the moment, the arrival of the Black Death was really just a local tragedy.
The big danger was that the Black Death would arrive at a major port, a big centre of population with trade and people moving in and out from other parts of the country. And sadly, that was only a matter of time.
A little over a month after the Black Death had arrived in Melcombe, 70 miles north, the first case appeared in Bristol. The Black Death was on the move. 700 years ago, Bristol was Britain's third biggest city, a densely populated port with around 10,000 inhabitants. It was a major importer of wine and exporter of wool and cloth, making it one of the wealthiest places in the country. Rakshay is investigating what happened when the Black Death arrived here.
According to writers of the time, on a rainy morning somewhere between the 1st and 15th of August, a ship sailed up the Bristol Channel in preparation to dock here in the city centre. The ship was infected with the plague. Once plague arrived, it consumed the city at a terrifying rate. They said cruel death took 2 days to burst out. The disease first took root here around Broad Street in the heart of the city. Before the Black Death, this was the Oxford Street of Bristol, where people flowed in and out of the city gates. Once bustling with merchants dealing in wool, wine and fine clothes, it quickly became deserted and overgrown with grass. Historian Dr. Evan Jones has brought me into the old city to show me how the Black Death could spread so viciously and with such speed through Bristol.
If you look at this sort of a map here, you can kind of see just how crowded a city was.
I mean, even when you look at the map itself, the city walls almost look like one giant Petri dish, don't they? Yeah. I mean, what about like the streets? Were they similar to what we're seeing here?
Oh no, they're much more crowded than this. And the jettied buildings, which would be crowding out on each floor, would be, if you had been looking down here in the 14th century, there had been barely any daylight between the sort of the buildings on each side. Absolutely the perfect conditions for a disease to spread.
Densely packed streets like these were home to the working classes, perhaps dockers and labourers who served the busy port. Each 5-storey house could be home to 5 families, and if plague entered one household, it wouldn't take long for it to sweep through the neighbourhood. But it wasn't just the poor who'd be struck down by disease. The crowded living conditions of the working classes made them especially vulnerable to the plague. But the wealthy weren't safe either from its deadly grip.
The rich are dying as well, and that's really well illustrated by this list of common councillors, the richest, most powerful people in the city. And you can see how the names are being crossed off the list as people die.
Do you know what, though? I find this quite shocking. Just like showing you how many people are dying so quickly in droves. Disease doesn't care for status.
No, I mean, even here, it says here, this is under the mayoralty of John Le Spicer, and then one of the first names we see crossed off the list was John Le Spicer.
Bristol's top brass fell like dominoes, and entire swathes of the city's population, from weavers to brewers, shipwrights to priests, were wiped out. In desperation, the local bishop instructed people to make their way to church and pray to God. But these gatherings would only have helped spread the disease further. The mortality rate rose so high that graveyards had to be extended to cope with the mounting bodies. With thousands of people living on top of one another, the plague was about to rip through Bristol like wildfire. In all, 7,000 people, 70% of Bristol's population, were killed by the Black Death. Nearby towns and villages now lived in fear that the plague would spread inland. Terrified that they'd be hit next, neighbouring Gloucester weren't going to take any chances.
In September 1348, the people of Gloucester heard what had happened in Bristol, only 35 miles away and easily accessible by river. They barred their gates. It was now illegal for anyone from Bristol to enter the city.
Gloucester's emergency measures bought it a little time, but the spread of the Black Death seemed unstoppable. With 80% of England's population living in the countryside, the Black Death was about to cripple the country. The settlements surrounding Bristol and Melcombe were quickly engulfed by the disease as it advanced deeper inland. In September 1348, the plague hit the small Dorset town of Gillingham. What happened here gives us one of the most detailed pictures of how the disease could devastate communities.
700 years ago, Gillingham was a small village, a collection of local subsistence peasant farmers working land owned by the manor and paying taxes to their local lord for the privilege. But what's fascinating about Gillingham is that we pretty much know who all of them were.
Gillingham's manorial court records document that there were 300 families paying rent to the lord of the manor just before the plague. Most of them were peasant farmers who'd worked the land here for generations. At the Dorset Record Office, Mark Forrest has been studying the incredible documents that tell the story of what happened to families when the Black Death struck.
So, what are each one of these documents here?
Each of these sheets of parchment records a single session of a manor court. So the manor court is held every 3 weeks at Gillingham.
And you've got all the records, all the parchments made every 3 weeks during the course of the plague.
Absolutely. What we can tell from these is because we have them before the Black Death arrives, during the Black Death and after the Black Death, we have the ability to see how many people die usually in the normal course of events. So by the 23rd of September, we've only had 4 people who've died and their relatives have come on to take their land at the manor court.
In the whole year to that date?
In the whole year to that date.
Until September 1348, Gillingham's mortality rate was low. When the Black Death arrived, all that changed.
So this is the court for the end of October, early October, late October, and this is where the Black Death really begins to kick in. you get 20 deaths. So people are really beginning to realise that there's something quite badly wrong here.
Over the following months, the situation would become far, far worse.
So between this court, end of October, this one, beginning of November, this one, end of November, you've got people coming to the court and reporting that 100 of their relatives have died.
That's about a third,
That's about a third. In 9 weeks. And we can see them here, and we know their names. Alice LeWhite, John Shood, William Gaunt, John LeWebb, 2 cottages.
This is evidence of a catastrophe that is overwhelming this community.
It is, absolutely.
Must have been completely terrifying. Once the Black Death took hold of Gillingham, almost every household was affected. Land passed from husband to wife, from brother to brother, in a few short months, as each died just weeks after the other. They were completely helpless, and it must have felt as if their entire village was being annihilated. Mass death had struck the southwest without warning. Villages and cities alike were overwhelmed as the death rate accelerated from hundreds of people per day to thousands. Raksha has come to Nottingham University's Biomedical Research Centre to meet Professor Steve Atkinson and find out how this deadly disease was being transmitted.
So what we can see here on this image is we've got a small nematode worm which is about 1 millimetre long.
What's a nematode?
So it's a little tiny worm which swims around in the soil. We grow them in the lab and we infect them with plague bacteria. So what you're looking at is the green are the bacteria, so we've genetically modified the bacteria so that they fluoresce green, so it makes them much easier to see.
So this like really bright green that's kind of around this part of the worm, that's Black Death?
That's the plague bacteria. That's right, yeah.
So what have you actually found out then? What's happening here?
As the worm moves, the bacteria start to stick and then they start to accumulate, they grow, they replicate, but at the same time they are producing this mass, kind of a gloopy mass. It's called a biofilm, and it's a protective environment.
So it kind of protects itself inside the body of an organism.
Steve's research shows how the plague bacteria produces a protective force field which shields it from attack, making it difficult to kill. During the Black Death, it wasn't nematode worms spreading disease, but the blood-sucking parasites, fleas, that lived on infected rats.
So, here we've got a flea. This is the flea gut, fills with blood containing the plague. What the plague then does is creates a biofilm inside the flea. The really cool thing about this is that what happens is that the flea's mouth parts also get blocked around here with the biofilm. The flea then tries to repeatedly feed, possibly on different people, and eventually the pressure at the back of that biofilm will be released, and then you get an injection of a really large number of plague bacteria into the new host.
Wow, so then once that flea feeds onto a human or a mammal, it kind of ejects but quite a lot of bacteria then.
A lot of bacteria, yeah. And you don't need a lot of plague bacteria to cause an infection.
700 years ago, fleas and rats were everywhere. They were part of daily life, and no one connected them to the disease, so no attempt was made to stop them. November 1348. 5 months after the Black Death first broke out in Dorset, it had now killed 500,000 people in towns and villages across the southwest of England. Over the last few months, there had been new outbreaks in Oxford, Farnham, Southampton and Colchester. Tens of thousands of people were now dying every week. The one place that had been spared so far was London, but that was about to change. plague arrived in London on a rainy November morning. Some say from Bristol, others from Weymouth or Kent, but another likely theory is it came up the Thames on a ship bound for London's busy port. But what's truly remarkable is that London, the most connected, densely populated city in the kingdom, has survived thus far unscathed.
"700 years ago, London was a very different place from today. It was a walled city only 2 miles across, bordered by the Fleet River in the west and the Tower of London in the east. More than 70,000 people lived cramped together within those walls, and the plague quickly spread through its streets.
Until November, London had been thriving, but now it was rapidly turning into a ghost town. A witness from the time tells us that the mood was one of dismal solitude. Shops were shut, people rare, no one walking about on the streets, and the only sound was that of the moaning of the dying. London was effectively in lockdown.
Sheltered in his palace at Westminster, even the king himself couldn't escape the terror.
Edward III was one of England's most powerful kings, a strong monarch, builder of castles, conqueror of French territory. If anyone was going to come through unscathed, you thought it would be him, locked away in his grand palace, isolated here at Westminster. But Edward was in a miserable state. The plague had reached the threshold of the royal family itself. Just a couple of months before, his daughter, Princess Joan, had gone down with the disease.
She was on her way to marry a Spanish prince when she was struck down travelling through France. The king would never see her again.
Edward III wrote to the King of Castile. He said, "No fellow human being could be surprised if we were inwardly feeling desolated by the sting of grief." It's an amazing thing to have such a candid description of emotions from one of Europe's most powerful men, particularly over 700 years later. It just shows that the Black Death was a true leveller.
Whether you were rich or poor, young or old, it was clear that nowhere and no one was safe. I've come to the Weald and Downland Museum in West Sussex to meet historian Eleanor Yanega to find out why the plague was able to spread so easily through 14th century homes.
That's a nice little dwelling.
I know, isn't it great?
So who would have lived here?
During the Black Death, lower class of peasant.
Okay.
I say lower class because, you know, peasant just means you're a farmer.
Someone working the land.
Exactly.
Okay. Is the fact they lived like this responsible for the terrible mortality of the Black Death?
To a certain degree, yeah, but not in the way that most people think. Okay, because a big thing that people tend to bring up when they think about the medieval period is, well, effluent.
It's stinky and they're just throwing all their rubbish in the street and they're poo in their wee.
Exactly. And that's not actually true.
Okay.
First of all, if you're out here in the countryside, you probably have a designated spot that you kind of use like an outhouse, something of that description. Most cities, you know, like London, York, they have regulations that say you absolutely cannot just like go throwing your chamber pots in the street. So there's something that's called a midden. So you would have that kind of behind your house, or, you know, in cities there's sometimes kind of like corporate ones that are owned by the city itself. And you take your trash, you put it in there, you bury it. But this is one of the health problems, because having a bunch of garbage buried in one area attracts rats. So if you've got a lovely little midden out back that the rats can go get lunch at, they might come and, you know,
move into your house.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice and cozy, yeah. Wow, yeah, you can see a rat would be at home in here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And let's have a look at the thatching in here. They can like get in there, make a nice little nest.
Ooh.
You know, you've got the hearth right in the middle of the room. So if you have a nest up in the roof, you're gonna have all this kind of like nice warm air rushing up. Great place to live if your source of food is just outside.
And you can imagine the little pitter-patter of feet up here in the rafters. And there would have been food inside, I guess, as well.
So back in here is a kitchen. So a rat can just run in there and nab some of your food anytime they like. You know, in this situation, even the furniture lends itself to rats getting in. More particularly, there's rats in the bed.
Little bed.
Yeah, yeah.
Shall I
So
go on the medieval bed?
yeah, try it out, try it out.
Ah, it's quite cosy.
Right? Straw mattress, this is what we're working with here. More comfortable than you would think. Problem is, if it's comfortable for you, it's also comfortable for rats and fleas.
So there's plague in the beds?
In the beds. And this is kind of really heartbreaking, actually, because say you are a peasant who's living at this level of poverty. One of the few things you're going to have to look forward to every day is getting into your nice, comfy bed and relaxing at night. And it's just those little creature comforts that are available to ordinary people that make you susceptible to the plague.
The kind of place you think you're going to be safest is actually a place where you could contract plague.
Yeah, exactly.
People's living conditions did help the spread of the plague, but today we don't think that was the only reason that homes were hotbeds for disease. 700 years after the Black Death, research at Nottingham University is now revealing another cause. The plague wasn't just being spread by rats and fleas, it was also being spread by human body lice too. Professor Atkinson explains exactly how they transmit it.
So what they do is they actually scratch the surface of the skin. They don't actually penetrate into the skin. While they're feeding, they are probably pooing as well. But then what happens is, because there's irritation from the feeding, there is a potential for someone to scratch and then rub the poo into the open wound.
Oh, it's pretty gross, but very effective as a bacteria, isn't it?
Yeah. And not only that, but the poo, there's large quantities of it. If it dries out, it can be aerosolized and it could potentially then spread, and people could then breathe it in.
Because when you explain it in that way, you realise that it's very easy to catch it.
Absolutely, and people were living in close proximity to each other. They were sharing clothes, they were sharing bedclothes, maybe all living in one room.
Not washing their clothes.
Exactly, and so, yeah, it offers an additional explanation to how the organism could be transmitted.
Yersinia pestis, the superbacteria.
The superbacteria, indeed.
Rats, fleas, and lice were now spreading the disease at a devastating rate. Up and down the country, doctors desperately try to find ways to cure the sick and dying. I'm investigating some of the methods they used with medical historian Kevin Goodman.
So these are the kind of typical things that a surgeon will be using in their daily practice.
Yeah.
I mean, how are they going to help me if I've got the Black Death?
Okay, we've got a few hooks and probes over there for pulling back flesh and muscles. And we've got a selection of cauterizing irons.
I quite like the look of this.
So, this is a fleam that is used for cutting into flesh and releasing blood from the vein.
I mean, why would you want to do that, though?
You've got an excess of blood, in particular, bad blood.
Oh, so the medieval surgeon will be trying to get rid of the blood.
Exactly, bad blood, yes.
Yeah.
So, what I'm going to need you to do is roll up a sleeve.
Okay. You're not really going to do it, though, are you?
So what we'd do, we'd get the knife or the fleam and we'd make a cut, and then, as you're clenching the fist, some blood would drip out, and then when we've considered to take enough blood, if I could have your finger, there you are, until it stops bleeding.
So what examples can you show me of the things that you would do if I came to you if I had a massive bubo on my neck?
What we have to do with a bubo is we've really got to burst it to help the body. One way would be to use a cauterizing iron and then pop the bubo.
Ooh. I bet that's going to be quite stinky though, isn't it?
Yes, and painful. But that's not the only way I've got of bursting a bubo.
What's the other way?
I could actually use one of these, a cupping glass. So what we would do is, we We get our flame again. We would make a cut, and then we would heat the cup up, place it over the bubo, and as it cools down, a vacuum is created, and it would cause all the bad blood to be drawn out of the bubo.
What about the more refined medicine and practices?
Well, I could make you a nice ointment. So what we have here is some nice hog's lard and the magic ingredient, some vitriol.
What's vitriol?
Sulfuric acid.
Hang on. You want to put that on my skin? I don't think so.
No.
I'm not surprised it burst.
Well, it is being played very convincingly by some wine vinegar for this occasion.
And then you just simply mix it all together.
Yeah, that's quite a bit mixed up there.
Oh, meaty. I can smell that
It is.
now.
For the acid, so we'll just put a drop in there. So it's going to be the sulfuric acid that eats into the bubo, but the fat is the carrier. That's holding it there. Right.
Right, then go on then, slap it on. Lovely. I mean, it feels nice, but I'm not really getting how this is going to help.
Basically, what's happening is the acid is going into the bubo. It's
Right.
softening it up.
Yeah.
So that will allow us to burst it, basically.
It's an interesting approach. Or would it really have worked?
Not really. The terror would be undescribable. So, yeah, whatever, they would try it.
With no understanding about germs, these brutal tools could actually infect wounds, killing, not curing their patients. The plague had now spread from the West Country to London and the South East, taking out almost half the population of most places. Ordinary life was grinding to a halt. Nearly every village, town and city fell eerily quiet, except one. I've come to Canterbury in Kent. By November 1348, this city, like many big centres in the south, had been hit hard by the plague. Thousands had already died. Unlike other towns and cities across the country that were emptying as people fled from built-up areas, Canterbury was filling up. People were flocking here. And that's because they thought, in a time of terrifying disease, the one person who might be able to help was God. I've come to the cathedral to meet Dr. Cressida Lang to find out why so many flocked here during the Black Death. On these steps, you can see how worn they are. These are hundreds of years of people doing exactly that.
Absolutely, thousands of feet coming up these stairs.
And what are they here to see, particularly?
So they're here to see the golden shrine of St. Thomas Becket.
200 years before the Black Death, Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, was murdered in this cathedral. The golden shrine holding his body brought pilgrims here in droves, in the hope that he could cure them and their loved ones.
They were keen, obviously, to pray, to visit the tomb, but also to bring something home, to bring a souvenir home. So what we have here is an example of a pilgrim badge. So this is a medieval ampulla, a little receptacle that was sold containing water just tinged with the blood of Becket.
No. So if your family are sick, your neighbours, that might help.
Yes, there was a strong belief that this, having been brought back from Canterbury, a pilgrim souvenir filled with the water, touched with Becket's blood, would have had healing properties.
I completely understand why they'd believe that, but what was in reality, everyone coming here must have been quite a health risk.
Yes, I mean, something like this brought psychological comfort, sort of calmed the soul, but so many people gathering in Canterbury, maybe in crowded conditions, must have caused some spread of the plague.
It's desperately sad to think of people going to all of this effort to try and avoid the plague, to try and save themselves, actually might have put themselves in harm's way.
Inevitably, but the draw to come here to seek healing and comfort was just so strong.
But nothing could halt the relentless spread of the disease. Every day, the Black Death moved even faster, and the numbers continued to grow. Nowhere felt the force of the devastation more than England's capital. This is Charterhouse Square. Today it's a quiet park close to St Paul's Cathedral in central London. In 2013, engineers constructing a shaft for a new underground railway unearthed something extraordinary. 700 years ago, when London's residents began to fall ill with the plague, this land had been used as a mass burial ground. Raksha is meeting archaeologist Don Walker to find out more.
So you uncovered a really gruesome discovery, didn't you?
Well, the lucky thing for us was with Crossrail, we got to excavate in areas where we normally wouldn't be able to. And we went down 3 metres below this surface, and we got down to the original Black Death cemetery. We were lucky enough to find some of the burials from this emergency burial ground.
As Don's team dug in the narrow shaft, they uncovered the remains of 25 people. Just the tip of the iceberg, as archaeologists estimate as many as 20,000 could be buried here. But intriguingly, although hundreds of the dead were being brought here every week, the bodies weren't just being thrown carelessly into the pit.
The burials were well ordered, carefully placed in the ground. Some of them obviously had coffins. They weren't all in some mass pit. They were in individual graves.
And that's really surprising, isn't it? Because I think that sometimes that people would just kind of go, all right, well, I'll just sling them in. But what you're saying is the complete exact opposite of that.
That's the amazing thing about these burials. This was the greatest disaster to hit the world. And the rate of mortality was higher than anything else they'd ever experienced. And yet, they still seem to manage to bury these people in the normal way.
One of the skeletons unearthed in the plague pit is today preserved in the Charterhouse Museum, and Don and his team have been able to discover more about them.
So Don, this is one of the 25 skeletons that was found in the plague pit.
That's right. This is a male individual. They died between the ages of 18 and 25 years of age, so a young adult in the prime of life. And we know from isotope studies that they were brought up outside London, somewhere in eastern or southern England, and they moved to London when they were about 5 years of age.
It's quite sobering, isn't it, to think that they knew this disease was coming, that people were going to get struck down by it, that they had to make these makeshift burial grounds and prepare themselves. There were bodies just streaming in on a daily basis being buried here, but with such care and respect.
Yeah, I think it shows that there's a certain amount of administrative control, and it may even have come from quite a high level, perhaps even the monarch. And I think it does show respect for the population, but also shows that they were prepared to deal with an emergency that they knew was approaching.
1 in 10 Londoners resident here in 1348 are thought to be buried beneath this park. In all, the Black Death left at least 35,000 people in London dead, 50% of the population. Almost every Londoner must have lost a family member, neighbour or friend.
In the 6 months since plague had arrived in the summer of 1348, it had torn through southern England. But now there were hopes as Christmas approached that the cold weather might kill it off. Those hopes were about to be shattered. In the next programme, I'll uncover the progress of the Black Death from New Year 1349. I'll investigate how it became a pandemic, causing devastation and terror from London all the way to York in the north. Now, in the space of a couple of weeks, these kids have gone from having a life of quite relative luxury
Yeah.
to mum and dad dead, possibly moving cities to Hull. I'll discover how some people may have been more likely to catch the disease.
People who succumb to the Black Death seem to carry a particular variant of a gene.
And Raksha will witness the brutal punishments carried out as the country descended into chaos.
What you got right here is a whipping frame.
Does it get much worse than this then?
I'm afraid it does.